You're listening to the Savoir Faire Audio Experience.
Are you ready?
The Savoir Faire Experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Savoir Faire Audio Experience. Thank you guys for listening, following, sharing, and just communicating with us. We love to get the feedback from the guests that we bring on and communicate with. Today is really exciting for me because I love music. I love country music. I'm a Nashville boy myself. This person's also a Nashville boy, and so I'm really excited to talk with him. Tony Mantor is here. How you doing, Tony?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you finding time for me, man. I love this stuff. I mean, you've had a legendary career in music, and I know you're going to be kind of like, well, not really, but like you really have. I looked at a lot of the stuff that you've done and just really dove into it. And, you know, you've been in Nashville 30 years. You're an accomplished pianist. You're a singer-songwriter, released stuff under your own name, traveled with some really great artists, produced some really great artists. I mean, the accolades for music for you are just really great. So it's really exciting for me to communicate with people like you and just not only learn from you, but also educate people that listen to my podcast about the music industry and the things that you're doing, and really just kind of expose some of the stuff that you're into now, which is just like me, a podcast host. And I love the idea of that too. It's very cool to hear the transition that you're on in life is similar to what I'm doing as well, which is, I like that.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I want to dive into it. I want people to know a little bit more about you that may not know who you are. And so I want to start with a little bit of your background, and we don't have to go all the way back to, you know, your home life before you moved to Nashville. But maybe when you just started coming to Nashville, I'm really curious how music became such a huge part of your world and where the inspiration came when you were younger.
Well, actually, I have to thank my mother, you know, for being persistent. We had an old piano hanging around, and I would just play on it like any kid would. And she decided that if I was going to show that much interest in it, that she'd get it fixed up and get new ivories and get new everything on it. And then she set me up with lessons, and I kept doing that. And I watched, you know, a lot of different singers that I heard on radio and everything, and it just built to where that's what I wanted to do. I remember when I was in high school, one of the teachers, you know, said to me something, and I said, "Well, what do I care about this? I'm going to be doing music," and everybody kind of laughed, you know. Then and they just thought that it was just a pipe dream. So I just kept pursuing it, and ultimately, eventually, I wound up traveling to Nashville, recording and just doing different things, and here I am.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, the inspiration for that was really just learning the piano, having your mom kind of encourage you to learn the piano. And it's cool that she saw that you had so much interest in it and kind of souped the instrument up, because I don't think many of us got that. When I first picked up my guitar, it was this old broken down thing that it never held a note. It was hilarious because I used to play out in Nashville on this thing, and people were like, "What the heck are you playing? Like, your lyrics are great, but I have no clue what you're playing." And
right.
So eventually they would take you in and be like, "Let me show you how to tune this thing correctly." And like, you know what I mean? So
right.
it was that's cool that you had a little bit of that that from your mother to kind of you know, coax you into that realm. Well, you did some stuff back home before you came to Nashville in music. You're performing and playing out and stuff too, right? Like, were you part of a band then?
I did. I joined a band right out of high school, and they were all older than I was, and had different music, but I enjoyed a lot of what they did because I just like music. So I joined them and played with them for a couple of years, and then the interesting part was I had some friends that were songwriters, and they didn't have any transportation, and so they asked me if I would take them to Nashville because they were country songwriters. I was more on pop and R&B and you know, rock. That's kind of what I enjoyed. So I looked at them and I said, what do I want to go to Nashville for? Because I had this perception that Nashville was just this hick town, and it was all Hank Williams and country music and all that. And I had no desire, but ultimately I did take them. And once I got here, it was like, wow, Nashville is just like Boston or LA. It's, concrete and steel. The only difference was that the people here, because when you go into any tourist town, they're always going to treat you nice. But
Mm-hmm.
the working part of it, the session players, the people that I worked with on that end, they just treated me in a different way. It was more relaxed. It was more, not worried about the minutes. Oh, well, it's 11:30, so we got to quit. Our contract ends at 11:30. They would take and finish the session. They wouldn't leave me halfway through a song. And I just found the atmosphere to be really cool. So because of that, anytime I started recording, I would always make a trip to Nashville. And I started recording in Nashville. So that ultimately was my path to getting here.
Okay, cool. I love that. That's really good. It's a kind of interesting story, actually, because mine came from a different perspective. My mom got married to a fashion designer that was trying to sell his stuff in Nashville, and we just ended up there one day.
Okay.
It was like, hey, want to go for a ride? And then we just like, oh, we live here now? That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. So obviously you got to Nashville. You went to Nashville in like 76. It's clearly not the Nashville we know of today. It seems to be a little bit
Right.
more of a party town. I was there in the late 90s when I was there. And it was still a very kind of cool vibe. I always told people, like, when you're in the music industry in general and you're in Nashville, everyone really, it's like kind of helping hands. There wasn't a lot of cutthroat kind of behavior there like there was in other music cities. And that's what I really liked about it. And it sounds like your experience was similar, like the idea that people really just kind of like for the reward of the craft, like no one really gave up on anything. They really
Yeah.
want to be in part of it and be intermixed. And that's really cool. So when you first got to Nashville, what was your first thing that was happening? Were you performing, writing? What was the main goal?
Well, when I first it was the way I kind of developed into getting to Nashville was I was in the studio, and my friends had actually got some people that wanted to record a few of their songs. They liked them. The piano player didn't show up, so I wound up sitting in with all these great musicians. And this guy comes in, and he knew every studio player there but me. And he comes up to me, introduces himself, and he had a small independent record label. And he goes, man, how would you like to go out on the road with Ronnie McDowell? His manager's looking for a keyboard player and a background singer, and you could do both. And that was before Ronnie got a hit record and everything. And it was like, I'm going, who's Ronnie McDowell? So they sent me over, and I met him, and I wound up doing a short tour with him. And that's kind of what got me into, okay, I got to know the players. I got to know a lot of different people. And then I kept recording my songs as a singer-songwriter, and I signed to an independent record label, and I had some hit records around the country, but I just never got that big hit that put me over the top to where I could go out there and do 20,000 seat arenas and do that. But I had the good fortune of being able to work with a lot of great people. And I wound up working with Gary Paxton and Bob Millsap, that was producing me, and they had worked with all the stars and done so many different things. And then they were getting to the point of where they was going to retire, and Bob calls me up and he goes, you understand music, you understand a good song, you understand how to put it together, you understand all this. Why don't you get yourself off the road and come down here and do what we do, because we're getting ready to retire. So that was my crossroads. Do I get off the road? Do I stop my music and stop trying to become the singer-songwriter that I wanted to be and have hit records on the radio? Or do I get down there and try and create the hit records that you hear on the radio? So I had a choice to make. And ultimately, the choice was made for me because I was on a session one time, and this was before the cell phones were out there, and a friend of mine that was a session player came up to the producer, which was producing me at the time too, and he goes, man, I saw your son here yesterday, And he goes, "Oh, I didn't realize that my son was here. I'll have to call him." And he didn't have a relationship with his son because he was the lead singer of a very popular band in the 60s. He was on the road all the time. So I saw that and I'm going, man, that's not going to be me. I can't do that. So that kind of was the catalyst to me making my decision to move to Nashville and get behind the scenes and start my production career.
That's cool. I appreciate you being vulnerable and telling us that story too, because that's very unique. I mean, I'm sure that your career was booming, at least. I mean, you're traveling, you're performing, you're in front of the crowd, you have a different lifestyle than kind of being behind the scenes a little bit more. But is this when you launched Plateau Music? Was that kind of part of this part of your years there?
Well, Plateau Music first started out as a production development company in '93 here in Nashville. I'd been using the term Plateau Music since '91, but it really became focused in '93 when I moved to Nashville. Then I was working, producing people, doing, song productions for singer-songwriters, and all that was happening. And then in 2005 is when Plateau Music actually became a independent record label. I had a singer I was producing, and they didn't want to take the time to wait for the pitch process. The guy that was backing it said, let's try and make this thing happen. And ultimately, I started working and started having some hit records that went out there. And then that led to other people I produced and more hit records that I got out there. And it just kept growing and building from there.
Okay, very cool. And you produced Debbie Campbell, Bobby Brooks Wilson. Like, these are the kids of legends. I mean, right? So these guys were really allowing you to kind of be a part of their thing. And I always thought about that, like the artists that I've recognized from, even my time in Nashville, late 90s, early 2000s, that are a little bit more accessible these days. Their kids are starting to produce stuff, but they're heavily involved in making sure that there's a great team built around their children. So at that stage, I'm sure it was very similar to that. And it's very cool that you had the opportunity to kind of work with these people and put that stuff together.
Yeah, and I worked with Mila Mason too. I produced a manager for a while. I've produced Donnie Most of Happy Days. He's kind of like a Frank Sinatra, Bobby Darin style. The big thing that I found working here in Nashville was staying away from the clicks. I wanted to create my own name on my own basis. I didn't want to be, oh, well, you worked with such and such, that's why you did it. Or you worked with so-and-so, that's why you did it. I wanted people to realize that, yes, I may have worked with a lot of great people, but I made a lot of the decisions that I made on my own based upon where I wanted to go and where I saw myself going as a producer. And I built it from there. And then I put it out. And then it was, okay, this has got to stand on its own legs. So either it's going to do well because I did it the way that I wanted to, or it wasn't going to. So luckily, it went well. So I had several hit records out there that I produced and continued to take and put people out, and it's worked out actually better than I thought it would when I first moved there, because I wasn't looking at this end of it. I was looking at more just production development. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's extremely cool. You've definitely gone through a lot, like done a lot. I mean, a singer-songwriter, the pianist, being on tour, seeing the music industry from all those different perspectives. Is there, take the old way and then talk to me about the new way, and just give me some advice back and forth. I mean, I'm really curious about, I think it was a very big deal back in the day when people got record deals, they need to be on tour. I still think people need a tour now, but with so many social platforms and so many distribution platforms, it's really about like just getting downloads and people to buy the music, which I see as a major difference. Obviously, songwriting is starting to change because we now have developments in technology and stuff that people are getting involved with. And there's obviously production is going to change because of technology and things like that. So what other dramatic things are you seeing kind of just being in the trenches, like that are different from then to now? And are they positive or negative?
Well, there's both, actually. I mean, when I first started producing, it was on 2-inch tape. There was no cutting and pasting. You had to take and do things, and you had to make things work because that was the way that you did it. Then you got into the digital platforms, and you could cut and paste and move things around and do all this thing. The pluses of that, it does help make the project go a little easier and smoother from a production standpoint. The minuses from that is sometimes you get lazy. You let auto-tune, you let this, you let that happen. And then all of a sudden you're producing somebody that can't sing, or they can't, let's say not, they can't sing, but you're making them sound better than they actually are. And if you go back to the 60s of the Janis Joplins, the Creedence Clearwater Revivals, the bands like that, the beauty of that music back then was the flaws, because you heard their raw emotion. You heard something that wasn't just perfect, but you could tell that the heart was there. Whereas now everything can be manipulated and made into a perfect piece of work. And when you put a person on stage, they cannot duplicate that perfect piece of work because no one is perfect. Mm-hmm. So that really has taken away from that part of the music. So not everybody does that. So I'm not throwing a dart and painting this broad paintbrush that everybody does it, but there's a lot of that done. And I just feel that it's nice to use some of the tools that are modern, that are digitalized, that make things quicker and easier, but still put the time into it and teach these people how to sing correctly, draw it out of them so that when they finish, they can say, I sang that song. That wasn't auto-tune. That wasn't manipulation. That's me singing it. I can go on the stage and duplicate that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
To me, the raw integrity of the music that sometimes is lacking in today's music.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's very unique. I mean, I've definitely seen artists where I've like, I fell in love with the music, and then I showed up at their live concert and they don't sound the same. And that definitely throws you for a loop. You're just like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then when you realize that there was like auto-tune and all these other things that were kind of involved in the studio, where they were recording the album and putting stuff out, then you're like, well, it sucks. They can't even hit that note that I liked so much. Like, right. So I completely understand that perspective. That's really unique. But I mean, I've obviously been dabbling with a lot of the new technology that's kind of coming out in music, and people are playing around with it too. So I was just curious if you had a perspective on some of those things as well. I mean, I've been telling people pretty openly that I've been writing music for a lot of years, like just as a songwriter. My guitar skills never got any better than they were when I was in Nashville in the late 90s. And so I think I'm isolated to just kind of making sure I have good penmanship and can write words really well. And it's cool to see some of the new technology kind of take that stuff and create something from it, which is something I never had. I never had studio sessions where my music was being fully brought to life and being prepared to go out to artists and things like that. So it's cool to hear some of that stuff and see kind of some of the changes that are happening. But if someone called me up and was like, hey, I really love that song I heard of yours that was on Instagram or whatever, would you like to come down and perform it? I can't. I don't sound like that. That's not me. Like, it's just, I completely understand that perspective, which is very, very unique. Well, I want to give some time to something that you're working on now and make sure that we really kind of push this out there, because I think this is really cool. Tony, you've been a songwriter and a singer-songwriter for a long time. You wrote a song called Why Not Me? And
well, actually, I didn't write that.
Oh, you did not write it? Okay.
No, a friend of mine wrote that.
Okay, corrected. Appreciate that. So there's a song called Why Not Me? You performed it though, right? I mean, you're
right. That's correct.
Okay, got it. So it's a very cool song. I love the message in this song. And at some point, you decided that you wanted to focus this track or dedicate this track to autism, and more specifically the autism community in Nashville. And you've also built a podcast around this with the same name, Why Not Me? So can you talk to me a little bit about that direction and just talk to me about podcast life and how this all this whole story of how this all came to be, including how you got your hands on the song, which is great.
Well, it's a very interesting journey. It's unlike no one else's, which is good.
Yeah.
back during COVID, when everything was shut down, I didn't have any productions. I didn't have any work that I was doing for people's shows. I mean, it just shut everything down. So some friends of mine, which are, some of the top session players in Nashville, call me up and they, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm just doing like everybody else. Just kind of wait until it gets over so we can get back to it. And they all said, well, I remember you was going to take and do a CD and record again. I said, yeah. Because I'd said that about 7 or 8 years prior to that. And I just never had the time because I was busy working on other people's projects. So, well, now's a good time. So basically I started taking some songs that I'd performed when I was on stage and some of the ones that I liked. And then I had some songs, some songwriter friends of mine that I liked. And uniquely, it all came together. And this friend of mine sent me a song that he just finished, and it was called Why Not Me? And it's really kind of strange because I heard it and I'm going, whoa, this definitely is me. And I called him up. I said, it's like you wrote this song for me. He goes, what do you mean? I said, because it's about never giving up on your dreams. It's about getting out there and continuing to do what you want to do. And that's what I put out on my social media all the time. So I said, definitely I have to do this. And the irony of it, a year prior to him sending me that song, I had put out a statement on Facebook that said, hey, if you guys don't think that you can do it, you got to stop and ask yourself, why not me? And I put in quotations just like it would have been a song. And I had people tell me, well, you need to write a song about that, but I never got around to it. He did it first. So he sent it to me. I liked it. So I said, yeah, okay. So during that time, my promoters in New York, Nashville, LA, and London all said to me, well, we want to hear what you're doing. I had just finished Why Not Me? So I sent it to him. I said, hey, here's something. And I produced it in a pop style, but I added a steel in it to give it texture, kind of like the Eagles used to do.
Okay, cool.
And all of a sudden, everybody's calling it a country song. I'm going, it's not country. But that's what their perception was because it had a steel in it, and nobody was putting steel in music, right? Country music right now. So they just had that perception it was a country song, and I just went along with it. So they said, you got to put this song out. You got to put this song out. And I'm going, no, I'm not going to get back on the road. I'm not trying to be a songwriter or a singer again. I'm just doing this for the fun of it, something to do, something to kill time, get something I can give to my kids, grandkids, friends, family, whoever wants it. So I did. I put it out. I let him put it out, and it really went well. And I said, if I'm going to do something with this, I got to do something to help people. So at that particular point in time, I did a video supporting our first responders. And I had just recently done a project for a fallen police officer. So I called up some friends of mine and said, hey, get me some pictures and short video clips of first responders. And then all of a sudden it got out, and I had first responders sending me pictures and short video clips from all over the country that wanted to be in the video. So I put it up, and it got about 125,000 views, and the song came to an end, and I'm going, oh, this is great. This was fun. And then a couple of months after it finished, a lady called me up and said, I really loved your song that you did. Could you do that for us? And she was a speech therapist for autistic children. And I told her, I said, I really don't know anything about autism. I don't think I don't know what I could do. So long story short, I met with a regional manager and we talked about different things and it looked like it was going to happen, but ultimately it didn't. So me working with their charity. So I did a video. I re-recorded the song in a more pop version, adult contemporary. I got people here in Nashville that was either, in the autistic community or special needs. And I put together the video and it got about 250,000 hits and it just blew up on me. So that's kind of what started this journey into the autistic community.
Okay, so very cool. So then you have the podcast that now takes over the name. What direction does the podcast go? Are you interviewing? You're interviewing people, right? It's just talking about the podcast or the autism community in Nashville and learning from them.
Well, how that all happened is there was a company out of New York City that was a business podcast, and they wanted me to co-host a show with them for 3 months. So I did, and I told them, I said, at the end of the show, before we go off, we need to talk a little bit about my video that I'm doing to support the autistic community. So we did that for 3 months, and then they wanted me to re-sign with them, and I decided that I was going to start my own podcast. So initially it was called Why Not Me the World, and because autism is a worldwide community, it's not just in spots. So I wound up talking with people all over the world, and it started hitting the Apple charts, the Spotify charts, and just started blowing up. And I mean, I had more people wanting to be on the podcast, and it just changed my whole vision of autism and what I thought it was to what it really is. And it just grew and grew and grew. So last year I had a company that wanted me to take and do my Autism Awareness Month around autism in the legal system. And then they were friends with another organization that worked with mental health issues, schizophrenia, ADHD, all this stuff that falls under the mental health umbrella. So they asked me, would you do something for us on May Mental Health Month? And I said, sure. So I wound up doing 61 straight episodes from April 1st to May 31st. And it took me 5 months to put it together. And I talked with judges, lawyers, former House of Representatives, CIT trainers. I mean, and plus people with lived experience. And it hit me in such a way that I'm going, man, I've got to do more. And prior to doing this, I had people reach out to me and call me and send me emails saying, I'd like to be on your podcast, or I've got a client that would fit your podcast. But it was mental health. And I would turn them away because mine was an autism podcast. So I've did that 61 straight episodes, and I'm going, these stories need to be told, and there's not a platform out there that's telling them like I do, because mine is more of a story-driven podcast rather than just facts and figures and all that. So people tell me their lived experiences, the challenges they go through on a daily basis, just different things that people can relate to, even if they know nothing about autism or anything in mental health. So I decided that I had to rebrand it and incorporate anything that falls under the mental health umbrella. Doesn't matter whether it's anxiety, bipolar, ADHD, schizophrenia. It doesn't matter, because everybody that doesn't have that lived experience has a perception of what they think it is, but in reality of what it really is, it's not even close. So I rebranded and I cut off the world, and I called it Why Not Me? ? Embracing autism and mental health worldwide. And it's just continues to grow, and I'm just amazed at people that want to be on my podcast, that come on it. And then I'm also amazed at the stories they tell, because some of it is very personal, and they tell things that most people wouldn't want to tell, but they do, because they feel that the story needs to get out there so people can better understand what's going on in things that they don't understand.
Yeah, that's really cool. I definitely applaud you for creating this platform, diving into this kind of experience in this niche. It's extremely cool. I'm curious how this, like, as the host, right? Because there's definitely days when I interview great people, and I leave the podcast with a little bit of different feeling about the world. And you're engaged with a lot of people with mental health, autism, things like that have a different perspective on the way the world works potentially. Talk to me a little bit about, like, how does this affect you, like as the host of a show like this?
Well, it's changed. The biggest thing about autism and mental health, schizophrenia, anything along that line, is the stigma that's attached to it. And there's a stigma that's attached to it because people don't understand it. And my feeling now is I've tried to stop using that word stigma, and I've tried to change it to perception, because people have a perception of what they think it is, but in reality, they do not know what it is because they don't understand it. So that has changed my whole life, because now that perceived stigma that I had has gone away. So before I started my podcast on autism, I said, man, it's got a stigma to it. Do I want to do this? But I did. And the more I talked with autistic people, whether they were autistic or parents of autistic children, or however they worked, or if they worked in the autistic community, it didn't matter. The perceived stigma that was there when I first started went away, because I started understanding these people and what they were going through, and they're no different than you and me. They're just trying to live their lives. They're just trying to take and they live it a little differently, and because of it, and there's a spectrum there. So sometimes you've got people that are on this part of the spectrum that, unfortunately, they've got the brain capacity of a 10 or 12-year-old, and they might be 20 something, so, and then you've got those that are just so brilliant that you talk to them and you wouldn't, it's like, wow, listen to this. They could be a Rhodes Scholar, and then everybody in between. So that changed my whole perception. And then when I had the chance to do the mental health month, and I was dealing with a lot of people that dealt with schizophrenia, and psychosis and all that, that had a stigma to it. I'm going, oh, do I want to do this? Because, that's people that unfortunately kill people or do damage or do serious harm to people, but I did it just the same, because I felt like, what's the worst case scenario? It lasts a month and then it goes away. But as it turns out, the more I talked with people, the people that help these people, the CIT trainers, the congressmen that try and craft bills for them, all this stuff, again, changed my perception. So now when I hear something on radio or I see something on TV where somebody did something, they shot somebody or they stabbed somebody, my perception and my thought process before I started talking with all these people was put them in jail and throw away the key. They're bad people. Now, since I've gone through this and I've talked with people, and I want to know more about, if I heard somebody that stabbed somebody or somebody that shot somebody, I want to hear more about that person and what they've been through, because I want to know, are they truly a bad person, or are they somebody that the system just failed them and that's what happened? Because I've heard so many stories where people have tried to get their loved ones help, but because the hands are tied and they can't do certain things, that they wind up doing something that's not good. And because they're not on medication, or they might have all these other issues that's going on that can be helped, but they're not getting the help because we don't have it set up to where it's easy to get the help for these people. So I look at it totally different now than I've ever looked at it. And I want to know, did the system fail them, or are they just bad people? So I feel that these are stories that need to be told, and people need to hear it, because it is just such a different perspective than what reality is if you get to know more about it.
Yeah, very cool. I appreciate you sharing your perspective as well, because I'm sure not a lot of people know, like, being the host of a podcast show is a lot of work. And then when you have this kind of layer to everything, my show is a lot more fluffy and cool. Like, we interview CEOs, we talk to musicians, we really just talk about industries, and yours is much more heartfelt and really a very unique podcast that I think people really need to go check out. So the podcast is called Why Not Me? I found your podcast very simply by going to TonyMantor.com and clicking on the podcast tab, and I was able to go right there. You can also look for Tony Mantor on YouTube and some other platforms, so you can see the music video for Why Not Me, which is very cool. I watched the entire video before you and I connected. Really wanted to get an idea of what's kind of happening in your world and what's going on. But, you know, I just want to say thank you, Tony, for finding time to chat with me today. Thank you for kind of sharing your music journey with me too, which is obviously a big piece of my world too. But I'm so glad that you kind of went this direction on this podcast and really are giving a voice to unheard people. I think that's super, super cool. And as a fellow podcaster, I applaud you for that and hope people will go listen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And they can also find it at whynotme.world.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, man. I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate being on.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.